Welcome to Audiobooks. Immerse yourself in the world of stories, ideas, and knowledge, all through the power of audio.
Book title, Jane Eyre, by Charlotte Bronte.
Chapter 1. Orphan at Gateshead Hall. Cold, gray skies hung over Gateshead Hall, and inside its grand walls a small girl sat alone. Jane Eyre, 10 years old, orphaned and unwanted, found no comfort in the house that was supposed to shelter her. Her aunt, Mrs. Reed, treated her not with kindness, but with disdain. Her cousins, John, Eliza, and Georgiana, mocked her, bullied her, and reminded her daily that she did not belong. Jane had no protector, no companion, no true friend. On one bitter afternoon, Jane sought solace in her books. They were her refuge, her escape into other worlds where justice, courage, and beauty still existed. But John, her cruelest cousin, tore the pages from her hands and struck her. When Jane dared to defend herself, the household judged her the guilty one. Punishment followed swiftly. Mrs. Reed ordered Jane locked in the dreaded Red Room, a chamber heavy with silence where her late uncle had died. Its shadows seemed to whisper, its cold corners pressed in, and Jane's heart filled with terror. She cried out, imagining ghostly presences, but no one came to comfort her. The night in the Red Room etched itself into Jane's soul. It was her first true confrontation with injustice, with the loneliness of being unloved. Yet even in her fear, a spark glowed inside her, a determination not to surrender her spirit. This was the beginning of Jane Eyre's journey, a child cast aside, yet destined to rise with quiet strength.
Chapter 2. Escape to Lowood. The Red Room had left its mark on Jane, but her trials at Gateshead were far from over. Mrs. Reed, weary of her presence, resolved to be rid of her. A place was found, Lowood Institution, a school for orphan girls. When the day came, Jane stood at the threshold of Gateshead for the last time, small and trembling, yet secretly hopeful. A carriage bore her away through winter roads toward an unknown future. Lowood greeted her not with warmth, but with austerity. The building was stark, its stone walls cold, and its dormitories lined with rows of narrow beds. The food was meager, the clothing thin, and the rules harsh. At its head was Mr. Brocklehurst, a man who cloaked cruelty in the language of religion. To him, suffering was discipline, and deprivation was virtue. In this grim place, Jane might have withered, yet something unexpected occurred. She found companionship. Helen Burns, a gentle, thoughtful girl, offered her kindness without judgment. Where Jane burned with indignation against injustice, Helen bore it with patience, speaking softly of endurance and faith. To Jane, Helen was both mystery and guide. Life at Lowood was harsh. Cold mornings, punishment for the smallest faults, and hunger gnawing at the girls. But amid the suffering, Jane discovered strength she had not known before. She learned to hold her ground, to think for herself, and to measure cruelty against her own sense of what was right. And when tragedy struck, when illness swept through the school and claimed Helen's young life, Jane's heart broke, but did not falter. She carried Helen's memory with her, a reminder that even in sorrow, compassion and love could survive. Lowood was no paradise, but it was the crucible in which Jane Eyre began to shape her destiny. Chapter 3. Growing into Herself. Years passed at Lowood,
and Jane grew from a timid child into a young woman of quiet determination. The school that had once seemed like a prison became her proving ground. The harshness of Mr. Brocklehurst slowly gave way to gentler leadership under Miss Temple, whose fairness and warmth offered the girls a rare sense of dignity. In Miss Temple's presence, Jane felt valued, her mind encouraged, her talents nurtured. She excelled in her studies, eventually becoming a teacher at the very institution where she had once been a frightened pupil. Yet with each passing year, a restless longing stirred within her. Though she had found safety and purpose, she hungered for more, for freedom, for experience, for life beyond the narrow walls of Lowood. At night, Jane would look to the distant hills and imagine a different future. She desired not wealth nor luxury, but simply a chance to live as her own person, to test her spirit in the wider world. It was this longing that guided her hand when she placed an advertisement in the newspaper seeking a new post as a governess. Soon an answer came, a position at a place called Thornfield Hall, caring for a young French ward under the charge of a mysterious master. Jane did not hesitate. With a heart both anxious and eager, she prepared to leave Lowood. Her childhood of neglect and her girlhood of discipline had forged her character. Now she was ready to step into the unknown. And so Jane Eyre set her course toward Thornfield, toward the great turning point of her life.
Chapter 4. Thornfield Hall. The journey to Thornfield carried Jane into a new chapter of her life. Leaving Lowood behind, she rode through the countryside, her heart a mix of nerves and hope. For the first time, she was not a pupil or a servant of others' will. She was to begin her own work, her own life. Thornfield Hall rose from the moors, vast and shadowed, its stone walls softened by ivy and thyme. Inside, Jane was welcomed by Mrs. Fairfax, the kindly housekeeper whose warmth was a comfort to the young governess. From her, Jane learned of her new pupil, Adele Varennes, a lively French girl, bright and affectionate, if sometimes spoiled. The days settled into a gentle rhythm. Jane taught Adele her lessons, walked with her through the gardens, and grew accustomed to the quiet halls. Yet beneath the calm, Jane sensed something hidden. At times, faint echoes drifted through the corridors, strange laughter, wild and unsettling, which Mrs. Fairfax dismissed with uneasy explanations. Though Thornfield was large, its master was curiously absent. Jane learned that Mr. Rochester, Adele's guardian, seldom visited. His name carried with it an air of mystery, as though the house itself waited for his return. For Jane, Thornfield was both sanctuary and enigma. It gave her peace after years of hardship, yet it hinted at secrets locked away in its silent chambers. And though she did not yet know it, her fate was already entwined with the unseen master of the house. The stage was set. Soon the quiet halls of Thornfield would no longer be quiet.
Chapter 5. Mr. Rochester appears. Winter winds swept across the moors the evening Jane first encountered him. She had gone out alone, walking along the narrow lanes, when suddenly a horse galloped through the mist. It slipped on the ice, and its rider was thrown. Jane hurried forward. The man she aided was stern-faced, dark, and commanding, his gaze sharp, though shadowed by pain from the fall. He thanked her curtly, half surprised by her composure, and rode on without revealing his name. Only later did Jane discover the truth. This was Mr. Rochester, master of Thornfield Hall. From that moment, her world began to shift. Rochester was unlike any man Jane had known, restless, brooding, and filled with contradictions. He spoke to her not as a servant, but as an equal. Their conversation sparkled with wit and challenge, each testing the other's mind. Jane, who had long been accustomed to silence, found herself speaking freely, boldly, almost fearlessly. Yet Thornfield's strangeness deepened. One night, Jane awoke to the scent of smoke. Racing through the corridors, she found Rochester's bedchamber ablaze. Without hesitation, she doused the flames and saved his life. He thanked her with a look more telling than words. Yet he dismissed the fire as an accident. Jane sensed otherwise. The house held secrets, and Rochester seemed determined to guard them. Days passed, and a bond formed between them, unspoken but undeniable. Still, beneath the growing closeness lay questions Jane dared not ask. Who was Rochester truly? What shadows stirred within Thornfield's walls? In the quiet of her chamber, Jane felt a truth she could not yet name. Her life, once steady and solitary, had begun to burn with new and dangerous light.
Chapter 6. Conflicted Affections. The days at Thornfield grew fuller, brighter, yet also more complicated. Jane's lessons with Adele continued. Her companionship with Mrs. Fairfax remained warm, but it was her time in Mr. Rochester's presence that stirred her spirit most. He sought her company often. Their conversations, sharp and vivid, gave Jane a sense of equality she had never known. In his gaze she sometimes glimpsed warmth. In his silences she felt the weight of unspoken thought. She told herself she was only his governess, nothing more. Yet her heart did not listen. Then came the guests. Mr. Rochester welcomed a lively party of fashionable visitors, chief among them the elegant Blanche Ingram. Blanche, with her beauty and refinement, seemed the perfect match for a man of Rochester's station. She sang, laughed, and commanded the room with easy charm. Jane, quiet and watchful, felt her own smallness more keenly than ever. She told herself it was foolish to hope that a plain governess could never rival a lady of Blanche's rank. Alone in her chamber, she painted Blanche's portrait, then, beside it, her own, a stark reminder to her heart of the gulf that divided her from Rochester. And still the strange currents of Thornfield continued to disturb her. Muffled cries echoed through the corridors at night. Once a violent incident left a guest mysteriously injured. Rochester offered explanations, but his eyes told another story, a guarded truth Jane could not reach. Between her rising feelings and the house's dark whispers, Jane stood at a crossroads of desire and dread. She longed for Rochester, yet feared both the impossibility of her love and the secrets that shadowed Thornfield Hall.
Chapter 7. Secrets and Proposals. The days of gaiety at Thornfield faded, and with them Jane's quiet torment. Blanche Ingram, once so dazzling, proved hollow beneath the surface, her wit unkind, her beauty edged with scorn. Rochester entertained her company, yet Jane sensed he watched her with an almost hidden amusement, as if testing both Blanche and Jane herself. Then came the evening that changed everything. Rochester summoned Jane to the garden, where twilight painted the chestnut tree in silver shadows. His voice, steady yet searching, pressed her with questions of duty, of loyalty, of her future. At last, with a fire she could not mistake, he declared his love. Jane, disbelieving, thought he mocked her. "Do you think I can stay to become nothing to you?" she cried, her pride wrestling with her heart. But Rochester's words cut through her doubt. He did not want Blanche, he wanted her, plain, steadfast, passionate Jane. When she accepted, it was as if years of silence and restraint broke open. The storm that gathered overhead seemed to echo their joy, their defiance of the world's judgment. And yet, as if in warning, the heavens split the chestnut tree where they had stood, tearing it asunder. In the glow of her betrothal, Jane felt both exultation and unease. At last she was loved, wholly, fiercely, beyond rank or station. Yet the storm's violence lingered in her mind, whispering that happiness so hard won might not endure. Still, in that moment, she believed in love's triumph. She believed in him.
Chapter 8. The Wedding Interrupted. The morning of Jane's wedding dawned bright, almost cruelly serene. Dressed in her simple gown, she walked to the church beside Rochester, her heart trembling with both joy and disbelief. Could it be true that she, once a despised orphan, was to be his wife? The vows began. Jane's voice was steady, her spirit braced for happiness at last. But before the words could be sealed, a voice rang out from the pews. "The marriage cannot go on." Strangers stepped forward, declaring Rochester already bound in marriage. At first Jane thought it some vicious lie, a plot to wound him. But the truth could not be denied. Rochester himself, his face burning with defiance, admitted it. He had a wife still living. The company was led back to Thornfield, where the secret was unveiled. Behind a locked door, in a shadowed attic chamber, Jane beheld her rival, not a radiant bride, but a broken soul. Bertha Mason, Rochester's wife, raged in madness, her eyes wild, her cries inhuman. She was both terrifying and pitiful, a woman imprisoned by her own mind. The revelation shattered Jane's world. Her love, her faith, her dreams, all undone in a single hour. Yet even as Rochester pleaded, begging her to remain, her resolve held. Love could not erase truth. Passion could not sanctify betrayal. That night, alone in her chamber, Jane wept until she could weep no more. By dawn she rose quietly, gathered what little she owned, and left Thornfield. She walked into the wilderness with nothing but her dignity, her sorrow, and her unbroken will. Thus ended her first great trial of love, and began her greatest test of strength.
Chapter 9. Hardship and Refuge. Jane fled Thornfield with no clear destination, only the need to escape. She traveled across the moors, her small bundle of possessions soon lost, her money quickly spent. Alone, with nothing but the wild wind for company, she pressed onward until hunger and exhaustion brought her to the edge of despair. For days she wandered, begging at cottage doors, turned away more often than helped. Her clothes grew ragged, her strength nearly failed. At last, under a storm-darkened sky, she collapsed on the threshold of a lonely house. That house belonged to Diana and Mary Rivers, and their brother, St. John. Unlike the cold indifference Jane had known so often in her life, these strangers offered compassion. They lifted her from the brink of death, gave her food, rest, and care. With them, Jane found a fragile peace. The sisters were warm and intelligent, kindred spirits who welcomed her as a friend. St. John, their brother, was a different soul, severe, devout, a man driven by duty rather than affection. He saw in Jane not only a woman to be saved, but a spirit to be directed,
perhaps even controlled. As Jane regained her strength, she took work as a village school teacher, humble but honest. Though the position was modest, it gave her independence and a measure of dignity. After the anguish of Thornfield, after nights of starvation and solitude, this simple life felt like refuge. Yet even here, in the quiet valley, Jane's heart was restless. She had survived poverty, she had found new friends, but the memory of Rochester lingered like a flame she could not extinguish. Her body was safe. Her spirit, though tested, endured. But her destiny was not finished with her yet.
Chapter 10. A Different Proposal. Life with the Rivers family steadied Jane, yet her path soon darkened again with trial. St. John, austere and resolute, admired her strength and self-control. To him, Jane was not simply a friend. She was a potential partner in his great mission. He longed to journey to distant lands as a missionary, and he urged Jane to join him, not only in work, but in marriage. His words were calm, logical, even persuasive. He painted her life's purpose in terms of sacrifice and service, of labor for God's glory. To Jane's mind, his appeal stirred duty, but to her heart it brought only dread. For St. John's proposal carried no warmth, no passion, no true companionship. His love was for the cause, not for her. Jane wrestled with herself. She respected him, she honored his devotion, but to marry without love would be a betrayal of her spirit. She had once tasted love's fire. She could not accept a life of cold obedience. And then, on one fateful night, as she stood alone in her chamber, her choice was made for her. Across the silence of the moors, she seemed to hear a voice, deep, anguished, beloved. "Jane! Jane! Jane!" It was Rochester's voice, carried not by wind or earth, but by some bond beyond reason. Her heart answered instantly. She knew with certainty beyond all doubt that she must return. No duty, no reasoning, no fear could hold her back. Love called her, and she would follow. At Bonn, with quiet resolve, Jane prepared to leave the Rivers home. She set her face once more toward Thornfield, toward truth, toward destiny, toward Rochester.
Chapter 11. Return to Thornfield. The road back to Thornfield was long and heavy with silence. Each mile carried Jane closer to the man who had called to her across the moors, though she did not know what she would find. Her heart ached with fear and longing, fear that she had come too late, longing that he might still be hers. At last, she reached the familiar rise where Thornfield Hall should have appeared, its turrets proud against the sky. But what met her eyes was ruin. The house lay blackened and hollow, its walls torn open, its windows gaping like sightless eyes. Where once there had been life, laughter, and secrets, there was now only desolation. Shaken, Jane sought answers in the village. From the lips of old innkeepers and servants, the story unfolded. One night, fire had engulfed Thornfield. The source, Bertha Mason, Rochester's mad wife, who had broken free at last. She had perished in the flames, casting herself into the inferno. Rochester had fought desperately to save his household, dragging servants and Adele to safety, but in the attempt to save Bertha, he was struck down. The roof collapsed, leaving him blinded and maimed. Jane's heart clenched at the tale. Gone was the Thornfield of her memories. But Rochester lived, scarred, broken, yet alive. He had retreated to Ferndean, a remote manor hidden deep in the woods. With steady steps, Jane turned her face toward that place. The ruins of Thornfield had not destroyed her resolve. If Rochester was there, she would find him. Whatever his state, whatever remained of his strength, her path was clear. For her heart, once silenced, now beat with only one purpose: to be reunited with him.
Chapter 12. Reunion and Resolution. Ferndean was no grand hall, no proud estate. It stood hidden among thick woods, low and quiet, like a house that wished to be forgotten. Yet for Jane, it was the end of her journey, the place where her heart would find its answer. Through the rain she saw him at last, Mr. Rochester, no longer the stern, commanding figure she had first known, but a man humbled by trial. His eyes, once fierce, were sightless now. His stride, once proud, was uncertain, but in his bearing there remained the same indomitable spirit. When Jane spoke his name, he faltered as if struck by a vision. At first he feared it was a dream, a cruel trick of his longing. Yet as her hands touched his, as her voice steadied him, he knew the truth. She had returned. Their reunion was not marked by grandeur, but something deeper. Two souls tested by fire, choosing each other still. Rochester, broken in body, feared he was unworthy. Jane, stronger than she had ever been, declared her love freely, without shame, without condition. For the first time they stood as equals, not master and governess, but man and woman, bound in mutual devotion. In time they married quietly, their happiness needing no witness but themselves. Jane found the belonging she had sought all her life, and Rochester, in her steadfast love, found redemption. Sight returned to him slowly, enough to glimpse their firstborn child, and with it the life they had both believed forever lost. And so Jane Eyre's story closed not in grandeur, but in triumph of the heart. Out of hardship, loneliness, and fire, she had carved her place in the world. She had found love, not by surrendering her spirit, but by remaining true to it. Her journey was complete.